A swarm of starships emerged from the cold void, their arrival heralded by rippling distortions in the fabric of space-time. The Draven fleet, vast and meticulously arranged, spanned the horizon like a metallic storm cloud. More than 15,000 vessels, their hulls gleaming with the iridescent glow of exotic alloys, reflected faint traces of the distant sun. From massive dreadnoughts bristling with weaponry to nimble escort ships darting between larger craft, every ship moved with precision, an orchestrated display of dominance. At the heart of this grand armada, aboard the flagship Shorv Avon, meaning conqueror in the Draven tongue, High Commander Ighan Varlik stood imperious on the observation deck. His figure, tall and angular, was defined by stone-gray skin with a texture reminiscent of weathered rock and two piercing amber eyes that burned with cold intensity. The dim lighting accentuated the sharpness of his ridged brow and prominent jawline, giving him a perpetually stern and calculating expression. Behind him, officers moved with synchronized efficiency, their movements as calculated as the fleet's advance. "Report!" Varlik commanded, his voice low but resonant, carrying the weight of unquestionable authority. "Scanners have completed the initial sweep, Exalted One," replied strategist Koltar, stepping forward. The officer's uniform, marked with insignias indicating years of conquest, shimmered faintly. The third planet, designated Earth, is orbited by rudimentary satellites and small, non-threatening stations. The primary world itself displays a mix of unremarkable atmospheric and surface readings. Technologically primitive. A faint smile curled on Varlik's lips. He turned to face the projection of Earth, which rotated slowly before him, its blues and greens starkly contrasting with the surrounding void. "Primitives," he murmured. The stories were myths after all. Behind him, the assembled officers exchanged quiet nods, some allowing themselves faint smirks. The luster of humanity's reputation, whispered through centuries of alien lore, had been a nuisance, an illogical footnote in the chronicles of interstellar conquest. To find this world so utterly beneath them was validation they hadn't realized they craved. "Strategist Koltar," Varlik continued, his voice taking on a mocking edge. "Do you recall the tales of these humans? The ferocity with which they supposedly fought, their cunning strategies, how they once bested entire fleets despite being outmatched?" A ripple of laughter echoed through the command deck. Koltar inclined his head respectfully, though amusement was evident in his multifaceted eyes. "Legends, High Commander, spread by frightened minds to explain away defeats against superior foes." Varlik chuckled darkly. "Indeed, if this is the peak of their so-called power." He gestured toward the projection of Earth. "Then Earth shall fall like countless worlds before it. The Imperial Command will be pleased." The command deck hummed with approval as Varlik turned back to the holograms, now shifting to display tactical overlays of the solar system. Each planet, moon, and significant celestial object was marked with alien designations. The outlines of Earth's orbital infrastructure were laughably thin, barely worth a tactical analysis. Varlik's attention lingered briefly on the moon's orbit, which displayed clusters of reflective material his sensors categorized as mining debris or scientific outposts. "Our approach will be systematic," Varlik declared, his tone sharp and commanding. "Primary dreadnoughts will maintain position in the rear, ensuring long-range firepower is preserved. Vanguard ships will form an overlapping wedge as we advance toward the third planet. Each vessel must ensure that its targeting arrays remain operational." Koltar interjected, his voice cautious. "And what of potential defenses, Commander? Primitive though they may be, we've encountered systems where lesser civilizations are prone to desperation," Varlik finished. His tone grew cold, cutting off Koltar with a precision honed by years of command. "I do not underestimate, nor do I entertain fantasies. We will proceed with overwhelming force." As Varlik's orders spread through the fleet, the vast armada shifted subtly. Engines ignited with synchronized bursts of plasma, their collective glow resembling a second sunrise over the distant gas giant. The fleet began its deliberate descent toward the inner solar system, cutting through the silence of space with all the inevitability of an avalanche. From the viewport, Earth appeared closer now, its vibrant hues contrasting with the stark emptiness surrounding it. Yet to Varlik, it was nothing more than another conquest, a stepping stone in the imperial ambition to dominate the galaxy. His officers murmured quietly among themselves, speculating about the ease of the invasion. Some wondered aloud if the humans would even bother resisting. "Let this be a lesson," Varlik proclaimed suddenly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. The officers snapped to attention. Civilizations that fail to ascend beyond mediocrity are doomed to fall under the boots of those who have. The fleet pressed forward, unyielding. Beneath the armored hull of Dominion's Edge, legions of alien soldiers stood ready, their weapons calibrated and their minds conditioned for battle. None doubted their victory. They were the chosen harbingers of the Empire, unstoppable and absolute. As the Earth grew larger in the view screen, strategist Koltar spoke again, his tone tempered with curiosity. "High Commander, our intelligence suggests this world is fractured, divided among many governments, each wielding minimal power. If there is resistance, it will likely be disorganized." Varlik's lip curled. "Then we shall crush them piecemeal. A divided prey is no prey at all." The fleet adjusted its formation, the vanguard expanding to encircle the inner planets as reconnaissance probes darted ahead. These small craft began transmitting streams of data back to Dominion's Edge, confirming the absence of meaningful resistance. The tension in the command deck eased further. Varlik stepped closer to the projection, his eyes fixed on the shimmering image of Earth. He allowed himself a moment of indulgence, imagining the accolades awaiting him once Earth was delivered to the Empire. "Mark this day," he said softly, though his voice carried to every corner of the deck. "Their myths crumble today, under the might of our Empire." The Draven fleet, unwavering in its advance, pushed past the crimson dust of Mars. The reddish sphere loomed in their displays, casting a faint glow over the observation deck of the Zorviven. It was a world they dismissed at a glance, its surface pocked with ancient craters and its thin atmosphere unsuitable for meaningful habitation. Yet, as the fleet passed its orbit, subtle fluctuations began to ripple through the sensor arrays. "Exalted One," Koltar said, his voice clipped as he examined the readouts before him. "Our long-range scanners are detecting irregularities, faint energy signatures, localized but inconsistent. They do not match this system's natural phenomena." Varlik turned, his amber eyes narrowing at the strategist. "Anomalies?" "Yes, Commander. The signals are faint, but persistent," Koltar replied. "They appear to originate from various locations near the planetary surface and orbit. Likely environmental interference." Varlik waved a dismissive hand. "Adjust the calibration and filter out the noise. This system is primitive, as are its eccentricities. Do not let such distractions slow our advance." Koltar inclined his head and returned to his station, his claws tapping at the controls. The energy signatures, though weak, remained stubbornly present. He frowned, but suppressed the unease growing at the back of his mind. The commander's confidence was absolute, and Koltar dared not question it openly. The fleet pressed on, leaving Mars behind as the moon's pale silhouette came into view. The celestial body hung motionless in the void, a sentinel to the shimmering blue-green orb of Earth beyond it. Strategist Koltar, now focused on coordinating the fleet's forward momentum, barely noticed when the first crackling distortion broke through the command deck's comms. "Exalted One," a communications officer announced. "An incoming transmission. It's coming from Earth." The declaration froze the room for an instant before it was overtaken by murmurs. Varlik's ridged brow furrowed, his expression darkening. "Human? Play it." The transmission began, stark against the hum of the Zorviven. A single voice emerged, calm and deliberate, unyielding in its cadence. "This is Admiral John Opere of the United Earth Defense. Your presence in this system is unauthorized. State your intentions and reverse course immediately." The Draven command deck erupted into quiet laughter. Officers exchanged incredulous glances, some shaking their heads at the audacity of the humans. Koltar turned toward Varlik, whose lips twisted into a derisive smirk. "Admiral John Opere," Varlik repeated mockingly, rolling the unfamiliar human name over his tongue. "Their arrogance matches their naivety." Koltar nodded. "Shall we respond, Exalted One?" Varlik stepped forward, his presence filling the room with unspoken authority. "Send this," he commanded. His voice, cold and commanding, dripped with disdain. "This is High Commander Ighan Varlik of the Draven Empire. You stand before the might of the First Imperial Command. Surrender your world, or it will burn. The Draven do not parley with inferior beings." The message was transmitted, and the officers on the deck watched for the humans' reaction. Minutes stretched into silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the fleet systems. When another response came, it was unnervingly steady. "High Commander Varlik," Opere's voice replied, unchanged in tone. "You are advised to withdraw immediately. Failure to comply will be met with appropriate measures." Varlik's expression hardened. "Appropriate measures?" He turned sharply, addressing the room. "They pretend to stand against us. This will end swiftly." The fleet reconfigured its formation, the vanguard pressing forward with an offensive wedge. Draven warships assumed precise attack positions, bristling with the firepower that had subdued countless civilizations. Reconnaissance drones darted ahead, scanning the path toward the moon and Earth. The Draven officers regarded the operation as a formality, expecting no significant resistance. But as the fleet crossed the moon's orbit, Koltar stiffened. His station erupted with warnings as energy readings surged across his console. "Exalted One," he barked. "We're detecting concentrated power signatures emanating from several points, just beyond the moon." Varlik's gaze snapped to him. "Weapons? Unclear. They are anomalous, unlike any terrestrial emissions previously recorded." Before Varlik could respond, the comms buzzed with an update from one of the Vanguard commanders. "Exalted One, our forward sensors are encountering significant interference. Long-range targeting systems are degrading." A sudden pulse of static cut the transmission short. The bridge fell silent. Varlik's jaw clenched as he turned toward Koltar. "Re-establish contact with the Vanguard," he ordered. Koltar's claws moved swiftly over his console, attempting to compensate for interference. "Wait." His voice dropped. "There's another transmission. Human." The new signal played, once again carrying Admiral Opere's steady tone. "High Commander Varlik, this is your final warning. Leave our system." The Draven command deck erupted into chaos. Officers barked reports of failing scans, fragmented sensor feeds, and the inexplicable persistence of the energy anomalies. Varlik's frustration grew, his voice cutting through the din like a blade. "Enough!" he bellowed. "Reinforce the Vanguard's formations. Prepare for engagement." Koltar hesitated before speaking, his voice tinged with unease. "Commander, the humans are aware of us. Their warnings are not without weight. Perhaps we should—" Varlik shot him a withering glare. "Do you question the Draven Empire's supremacy, strategist?" Koltar straightened, swallowing his protest. "No, Exalted One." Varlik turned back to the projection of Earth. Its serene beauty was infuriating, a silent affront to his authority. He clenched his fists, his voice a cold whisper. "We will show them the cost of defiance." As the Draven fleet moved into its final approach, the faint energy signatures ahead intensified. Koltar worked feverishly to analyze them, his claws trembling against the controls. Something about the signals gnawed at him, a precision and subtlety far beyond the capacity of a primitive species. "Exalted One," he began hesitantly. "I recommend caution. There is something more to these humans than we anticipated." Varlik did not respond, his focus fixed on the unfolding battle. The Draven fleet had never faced true defeat, and he did not intend for Earth to be an exception. Orders shifted seamlessly across the command deck as preparations for the next phase unfolded. The Draven fleet, still maintaining its tight formation, pressed forward, the gleaming expanse of Earth dominating their viewports. High Commander Ighan Varlik stood vigilant on the command deck of the Shore of Even, his amber eyes fixed on the holographic projection of the planet. The scattered energy signatures from moments earlier had grown more intense, yet they remained irritatingly ambiguous. "Status report," Varlik barked, his voice cutting through the low hum of the bridge. Strategist Koltar's claws moved swiftly across his console. "No new updates, Exalted One. The anomalies persist, but there's no indication of immediate threat." "Continue the advance," Varlik ordered, without hesitation. "These disturbances are nothing more than the desperate echoes of a dying civilization." As the Draven fleet surged closer, the calm was shattered. A burst of light erupted from the void near their right flank, followed by a deafening detonation. The Zorviven trembled slightly as shockwaves rippled through the formation. On the central projection, a cruiser in the vanguard disintegrated into a cascade of debris, its pieces scattering into the dark. "Report!" Varlik demanded, his voice reverberating with fury. "Exalted One!" Koltar shouted, his usually calm demeanor slipping. "Multiple impacts on the vanguard. We've lost 6 cruisers and 3 escorts. Origin unknown." The bridge descended into chaos. Officers shouted over each other, their voices a cacophony of panic. Tactical screens flashed red as more Draven ships were struck, their shields collapsing in brilliant bursts of light before their hulls crumbled under the onslaught. "Exalted One, we're detecting high-velocity projectiles," another officer called out. "But the trajectory is unclear. Sources unidentified." Varlik's features hardened as he stared at the projections. Dozens of ships were obliterated in seconds, their carefully maintained formations dissolving into disarray. His eyes darted to the flashing indicators, each marking another loss. "Strategist Koltar," he roared, "find the source of these attacks and eliminate it." Koltar's claws trembled as he worked, filtering through streams of corrupted data. The sensors, overwhelmed by interference, struggled to identify targets. "Exalted One," he replied, his voice strained. "The attacks are coming from multiple directions, but the exact points of origin remain obscured." "Obscured?" Varlik's tone was venomous. "By what?" Koltar hesitated. "Stealth technology, Exalted One. Advanced, far beyond what we anticipated." Another explosion rocked the fleet, sending officers stumbling. The projections showed the destruction spreading to the rear formations. Support vessels and supply carriers were obliterated in precise strikes, leaving the fleet vulnerable. On the observation deck, Varlik gripped the railing tightly. The humans, these so-called primitives, were toying with them, striking with precision and vanishing without a trace. It was not a battle, it was an ambush, executed with surgical ruthlessness. "Pull back the vanguard," Varlik commanded. "Reorganize the fleet into defensive clusters. I want overlapping shields and full-spectrum scanning immediately." The orders were relayed, and the Draven ships attempted to regroup. But as they moved, another wave of devastation tore through their ranks. Explosions rippled across the midline, and entire sections of the fleet were consumed in fire and shrapnel. "Exalted One," Koltar said, his voice hoarse. "Our analysis confirms multiple attack vectors: Mars, Saturn's rings, and hidden installations within the asteroid belt. And many other places." "Mars?" Varlik hissed. "That lifeless desert?" "Not as lifeless as we believed," Koltar replied grimly. "There are concealed installations, hidden within the terrain and orbital debris. Their strikes are coordinated, targeting our weak points." Varlik's fury boiled over. He slammed a fist onto the railing, the impact echoing through the deck. "Enough! Deploy all reconnaissance drones. I want those installations identified and destroyed." As the Draven drones swarmed toward the suspected attack sites, the ambush intensified. High-velocity projectiles, dense and sharp as meteoric fragments, sliced through the fleet with terrifying accuracy. Energy beams lanced out from hidden locations, carving through shields and hulls as if they were paper. Even the Zorviven trembled under the residual force of the strikes. The air in the command deck grew suffocating with tension. Officers shouted contradictory orders, their confidence evaporating under the relentless assault. The Draven ships, once a symbol of precision and power, now moved erratically, their formations fragmented. "High Commander," Koltar said, his voice urgent. Their strategy is clear. They are dismantling our forces systematically, exploiting our confusion. Then counter it, Varlik snapped. Koltar shook his head. Without clear targets, we cannot. Varlik's eyes burned with rage. He turned to the projection of Earth, its serene beauty mocking him. These humans are cowards, hiding in the shadows. They dare to challenge the Empire with tricks and deception. Exalted One, Koltar interrupted, his tone tinged with urgency. This is not mere trickery. It is precision, calculated and methodical. Varlik's expression darkened. Then we will burn their strategy to ash. He straightened, his voice cutting through the chaos. Redirect all firepower to Mars and Saturn's rings. Obliterate the sources of these attacks. The Draven fleet complied, redirecting their remaining firepower toward the suspected installations. Massive volleys of plasma and kinetic rounds surged toward Mars, bombarding its surface. Columns of dust and fire erupted from the planet, but the attacks did little to stem the human strikes. The hidden installations remained operational, their positions cleverly concealed within the terrain. The strikes on Saturn's rings fared no better. Explosions lit up the icy debris, but the precision attacks on the Draven fleet continued unabated. Koltar's voice grew more frantic. Exalted One, their countermeasures are adaptive. They're masking their true positions. Varlik gritted his teeth. His once unshakable confidence was now tinged with doubt. The humans had drawn him into a battle he could not control, their ingenuity turning the Draven's superior numbers into a liability. Exalted One, Koltar said, his voice quieter now. We must reconsider our approach. The losses, they are unsustainable. Varlik turned to him, his gaze fierce. You suggest retreat? No, Commander, Koltar replied, though his hesitation was palpable. But if we continue like this, the fleet will be destroyed before we reach Earth. Varlik clenched his fists, his fury barely contained. No, we press on. The Empire does not falter. As the Draven fleet limped closer to Earth, their formation a shadow of its former glory, the human strategy became clear. They would not meet the Draven head-on. Instead, they would bleed them dry, one calculated strike at a time. When the attacks finally seemed to subside, High Commander Varlik's voice cut through the tense silence on the command deck. Reports. What has happened to my fleet? Koltar, standing rigid at his station, hesitated for a moment before responding. Exalted One, we've lost approximately 1/3 of our forces. Cruisers, support vessels, even supply carriers. 1/3, Commander. The command deck of the Zorv Even was a scene of barely contained chaos. Officers scrambled between stations, their movements frenetic as they relayed fragmented data streams. High Commander Igahan Varlik stood at the center of the storm, his amber eyes blazing as he surveyed the holographic displays. The fleet was battered, its formations disrupted, but the Draven Empire did not retreat. Strategist Koltar, Varlik snapped, his voice cutting through the din. Reorganize our forces. Cluster formations with interlocking shield arrays. We will crush these vermin. Koltar nodded, his claws skittering across his console. Yes, Exalted One. Reconsolidating now. The Draven fleet shifted, their ships pulling into tighter configurations. Massive dreadnoughts formed the backbone of defensive clusters, their energy shields overlapping to create a nearly impenetrable barrier. Smaller frigates and escort ships flanked the formation, their weapons trained on every conceivable vector of attack. The once pristine precision of the fleet was gone, replaced by a defensive stance born of necessity. Deploy drones, Varlik commanded. Sweep every inch of this system. I want these insects found. Hundreds of reconnaissance drones swarmed into the void, their engines blazing as they spread out toward suspected human positions. They darted through asteroid fields, skimmed the surface of Mars, and probed the icy expanse of Saturn's rings. The Draven fleet, emboldened by the effort, unleashed sporadic bombardments at potential targets. Plasma beams and kinetic rounds rained down on barren landscapes, shattering rock and ice into clouds of debris. Exalted One, an officer called out. We've detected a cluster of energy readings near Mars. Minimal shielding, likely an auxiliary outpost. Varlik's lips curled into a predatory smile. Destroy it! A contingent of frigates broke away from the main formation, their weapons charging as they descended on the target. The first salvo struck the Martian surface with devastating force, carving deep craters into the red soil. Secondary explosions followed as hidden facilities erupted in flames, their camouflage rendered useless by the sheer volume of firepower. Target neutralized, the officer reported, his tone laced with triumph. But the momentary victory was short-lived. "Exalted One!" Koltar shouted, his voice sharp with alarm. "We're detecting energy spikes from the asteroid belt. Multiple trajectories inbound." The bridge shuddered as the first projectiles struck. Massive slugs, propelled by human mass drivers, punched through Draven shields with terrifying efficiency. Frigates disintegrated under the assault, their fragmented hulls tumbling into the darkness. "Redirect fire," Varlik roared. "Destroy those installations." The fleet pivoted, their weapons turning toward the asteroid belt. Plasma beams lanced out, carving through the debris field in search of hidden human platforms. A few installations were revealed, their positions betrayed by the faint glow of weapon discharges. The Draven ships unleashed their fury, obliterating the exposed bases in a series of fiery explosions. Yet, the retaliation came at a cost. The focus on the asteroid belt left other flanks exposed, and the humans capitalized with ruthless precision. Stealth platforms near Saturn's rings launched a coordinated strike, their missiles slicing through Draven clusters like surgical blades. A dreadnought at the rear of the formation erupted in a cataclysmic fireball, its destruction sending shockwaves rippling through nearby ships. "Damage report!" Varlik barked, gripping the railing as the Zorv even trembled. "Severe losses, Exalted One," Koltar replied grimly. "Rear defenses compromised. Human strikes remain unpredictable." Varlik growled. The humans' strategy was infuriatingly effective, striking and vanishing before the Draven could respond. Their tactics were not born of superior technology, but of ingenuity and audacity, exploiting every weakness in the fleet's cohesion. "We must adapt," Varlik muttered, his voice low but seething. "If they hide in the shadows, then we will drag them into the light." He turned to Koltar. "Deploy hunter-killer squadrons. Equip them with wide-spectrum sensors and full stealth countermeasures. I want every asteroid, every moon, and every scrap of space scoured." Koltar hesitated. "Exalted One, our forces are spread thin. Dividing them further could—" "Do as I command," Varlik snapped, his amber eyes blazing. "We will not be humiliated by these primitives." Koltar nodded reluctantly, relaying the orders. Squadrons of specialized ships launched from the fleet, their sleek hulls bristling with sensor arrays. The hunters dove into the depths of the asteroid belt and beyond, probing every crevice for signs of human activity. Their efforts bore fruit quickly. "Exalted One," an officer announced. "We've located a significant installation near Saturn. Large energy output, likely a central command hub." "Concentrate our fire," Varlik commanded, his voice cold and resolute. "Destroy it completely." The fleet redirected its assault, unleashing a torrent of plasma and missiles toward the distant installation. The human base, concealed within the rings of Saturn, erupted in a series of violent explosions as its shields buckled under the relentless onslaught. Debris scattered across the void, and the Draven officers allowed themselves a moment of satisfaction. But the humans had anticipated the attack. As the Draven fleet celebrated their victory, another barrage struck from an unexpected direction, Earth's orbit. Hidden platforms, disguised as debris fields, revealed themselves in a blaze of fire. High-velocity rounds and energy beams rained down on the fleet, targeting their weakened rear. "Ambush!" Koltar shouted. "The humans anticipated our movements." The fleet reeled under the renewed assault, their defensive clusters collapsing under the pressure. Officers shouted over one another, their voices a chaotic symphony of desperation. "Exalted One," Koltar said, his tone edged with urgency. "We cannot sustain this. Their strikes are too coordinated." Varlik's fists clenched. His carefully laid plans were unraveling, and his fleet, once a symbol of Draven dominance, was being systematically dismantled. "Enough," he growled, his voice barely audible over the din. "Withdraw the fleet to high orbit, regroup, and prepare for a final assault on Earth." The command was relayed, and the battered Draven ships began to pull back. As they retreated, Varlik's gaze remained fixed on the holographic projection of Earth. The humans had proven themselves far more capable than he had anticipated, but he refused to accept defeat. "This is far from over," he murmured, his voice filled with cold determination. "They will pay for every insult, every strike, and every loss. The Empire will not falter." Outside, the Draven fleet hovered in a tense and battered formation, the debris of their fallen vessels trailing through the darkness like an accusatory specter. On board the Zorv Even, High Commander Ighan Varlik stood at the center of the command deck, his piercing gaze reflecting a fury tempered by cold calculation. The humans' ambush had cost him dearly, but their resilience, their tricks, had only deepened his resolve. "Enough of this farce," Varlik growled, his voice a low rumble that silenced the murmurs of the command crew. "Deploy the Kralksan, and end this." A hush fell over the room as the name was spoken. The Kralksan, the Draven Empire's most devastating weapon, had obliterated entire planetary systems in previous campaigns. The weapon's immense power lay in its ability to convert raw stellar energy into an unstoppable wave of annihilation, capable of consuming everything in its path. Yet it was rarely used. Its very existence was a statement of absolute power, an unspoken threat to any who dared oppose the Empire. Koltar turned toward Varlik, hesitation flickering across his features. "Exalted One, the Kralksan is calibrated for planetary destruction. If it's deployed against Earth..." "Do you question my command, strategist?" Varlik snapped, his gaze sharp and fierce. Koltar straightened, swallowing his objections. "No, Exalted One. The weapon will be prepared immediately." A ripple of activity swept through the command deck as officers relayed orders across the fleet. Far at the rear of the formation, the Myrak, a dreadnought of incomprehensible scale, began to glow with an ominous light. Its sleek, black hull reflected no starlight, its surface interrupted only by glowing conduits that pulsed rhythmically as the weapon drew energy from the ship's core. The entire fleet seemed to dim in its shadow. The Zorv Even's command deck grew quiet as a holographic projection of the weapon appeared before Varlik. The targeting array locked onto Earth, its vibrant blues and greens now reduced to nothing more than a bullseye. "Commence firing sequence," Varlik ordered, his tone cold and absolute. Koltar's claws hesitated over his console for the briefest moment before he initiated the sequence. The conduits along the Myrak flared with an incandescent brilliance, lighting up the void like a newborn star. A low, resonant hum reverberated through the comms, a prelude to the cataclysm that was about to be unleashed. "Weapon charged at 80%, Koltar reported, his voice tight with the weight of what was to come. 90%. 100. The hum reached a deafening crescendo. Then, with a blinding flash, the Kralksan fired. A beam of pure energy, impossibly wide and devastatingly focused, erupted from the Myrak. It surged forward with blinding speed, consuming light in its wake. The weapon tore through the void, its immense power distorting space-time and leaving behind a streak of glowing ionized particles. The Draven officers watched in awe as the beam neared its target, confident that no world, no species, could withstand its might. On Earth's surface, the incoming beam would have been mistaken for a second sun, its light illuminating the night skies across continents. For a moment, it seemed the planet would share the fate of so many others before it. But then, as the energy wave reached the outer edge of Earth's orbit, it faltered. The beam shimmered, its edges splintering into chaotic patterns. An invisible barrier, an impenetrable shield, rippled into view for the first time, its surface a lattice of golden light. The shield absorbed the beam's energy, breaking it apart into harmless fragments that dissipated into the void. Within seconds, the weapon's devastating fury had dissipated, leaving Earth untouched. On board the Zorv Even, silence reigned. The command deck was frozen, every officer staring at the projection of Earth and the shimmering shield that had defied the Empire's most powerful weapon. "Impossible," Varlek muttered, his voice barely audible. "Nothing withstands the Kralxan." Koltar fumbled with the console, his movements frantic as he desperately analyzed the readings. "Exalted One," Koltar said, his voice strained. "The shield is generating energy signatures, adaptive ones. This is beyond anything in our databanks." "The humans—" "Enough!" Varlek snapped, though his voice carried less authority and more frustration. He clenched his fists, glaring at the glowing lattice that now surrounded the Earth like a defiant beacon. Before Varlek could issue further orders, another ripple of light illuminated the void, brighter, broader, and masterfully synchronized. The tactical displays aboard the Sorv even buzzed with activity as the human fleet surged into view. The previously clear void of space was now alive with movement. Battleships of unimaginable scale, flanked by cruisers and frigates, emerging from the concealed depths of Earth's orbit and beyond. Each ship gleamed with a dark, understated menace, their designs elegant but unyielding, as if crafted not only for war but for dominance. The Draven command deck, accustomed to the precision of their own fleet, was transfixed. High Commander Varlek's eyes narrowed as the tactical projection updated, revealing human fleets that were far more numerous and coordinated than anticipated. Vast formations locked into place with seamless efficiency, their arcs and trajectories forming an impenetrable grid around the Draven forces. Alarms blared as more signatures emerged, each marking the arrival of yet another human battle group. "Exalted One." Koltar's voice broke through the mounting tension, his tone laced with urgency. "Additional formations are appearing across multiple vectors. They've established a full encirclement, no gaps, no weaknesses." Varlek remained still, his amber eyes fixed on the projection. For a moment his face betrayed no emotion, as if refusing to acknowledge the magnitude of the situation. Then, with deliberate precision, he turned to his officers. "Mobilize all forces," he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. "Prepare for a concentrated assault. We will crush their formation and break through their lines." But before his words had fully settled over the bridge, the projection updated again. More ships appeared, dozens of them, emerging from hyperspace with calculated precision. Massive battleships led the charge, their hulls dark and angular, bristling with weaponry designed for maximum devastation. Behind them, swarms of smaller craft filled the gaps, creating a fluid yet impenetrable wall of firepower. "Exalted One," Koltar began cautiously, his claws twitching over his console. "These ships, they outmatch even our dreadnoughts in scale and armament. Their energy signatures indicate technologies, unknown configurations." A flicker of doubt crossed Varlek's face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Technological superiority means nothing without resolve," he said, his voice cold and unwavering. "These primitives rely on bluster and tricks. We will teach them the cost of defiance." Still, the tension on the bridge was palpable. Officers moved with hurried precision, their usual confidence replaced by a grim urgency. The Draven fleet, though battered, began to realign its formations, dreadnoughts and cruisers shifting into defensive clusters as the human encirclement closed tighter. Yet for every Draven maneuver, the humans responded in kind, anticipating their movements with unnerving accuracy. The silence was broken by the sudden activation of the comms. A single transmission came through, its clarity cutting through the cacophony of alarms and reports. Admiral John Opere's voice filled the command deck, calm and resolute. "High Commander Varlek," he said, each word deliberate. "You were warned. This is your reckoning." The simplicity of the message sent a ripple of unease through the Draven officers. It was not a taunt nor a plea. It was a declaration, an unshakable truth delivered without arrogance. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving a silence heavier than any explosion. Varlek clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "Mobilize the fleet," he commanded, his voice steady but laced with fury. "Reinforce our defenses. Show them the might of the Draven Empire." As the orders were relayed, Koltar hesitated, his eyes darting between his console and the projection. "Exalted One," he said carefully. "Their positioning. It's more than encirclement. It's an execution grid. Every ship, every formation is perfectly aligned to neutralize our forces." Varlek turned on him, his expression a mix of anger and disdain. "Are you suggesting surrender?" Koltar stiffened, his claws gripping the edge of his station. "No, Exalted One. I am stating that their tactics, their precision, it surpasses anything we've encountered. These humans are not acting on desperation. They are executing a strategy of total annihilation." Varlek stepped closer to the projection, his eyes scanning the shifting grid of human ships. He could feel the weight of Koltar's words pressing down on him, but his pride would not allow him to acknowledge them. "The Draven Empire has faced countless enemies," he said, his voice a low growl. "All of them claimed superiority. All of them fell." Koltar did not respond, but the unease in his expression was clear. The command deck grew quieter as the Draven officers turned their attention to the advancing human fleets. On the projection, the encirclement tightened further, with no sign of hesitation or misstep. The humans moved with a unity that defied the Draven's understanding, as if every ship, every pilot, and every commander shared a singular purpose. As the minutes stretched into an unbearable tension, Varlek's gaze remained fixed on the projection. He could feel the eyes of his officers on him, their confidence wavering. For the first time in his long career, he felt the weight of doubt creeping into his mind, but he would not let it show. He would not give these humans the satisfaction of seeing him falter. "Prepare all remaining ships for a full-scale counteroffensive," he commanded, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "If they want annihilation, we will give it to them." The Draven fleet, though battered and outnumbered, began to move. Engines flared as the ships shifted into position, their weapons charging for one final stand. But even as they prepared, the human fleets held their ground, their formation unbroken, their resolve unshaken. From the observation deck, Varlek watched as the first human battleships began to close the distance. Their engines burned like distant suns, their weapon systems glowing, poised to strike. And for the first time he grasped the truth that had eluded him for so long. These were not just myths. They were not primitives. They were something far more dangerous. A chill settled over him as the weight of inevitability pressed down. He was not staring at a fleet. He was staring at extinction. And then the battle began. The Draven dreadnoughts, still attempting to hold their fractured lines, opened fire first. Blinding streaks of plasma and bursts of kinetic projectiles lanced toward the human fleets. Shields flared and rippled as the attacks landed, but the humans' defensive arrays absorbed the impact with startling efficiency. Retaliation was swift and merciless. The human fleet unleashed its devastating assault with precision that bordered on the surgical. The opening salvo from Earth's battleships erupted like a symphony of destruction, their weapons systems igniting the void with blinding arcs of energy. Each blast tore through the Draven formation, bypassing shields and obliterating hulls in bursts of fire and shrapnel. Within moments, chaos consumed the Draven fleet. The Zorv even trembled as its shields absorbed the aftershocks of explosions ripping apart its escorts. High Commander Ighan Varlek gripped the railing of the command deck, his amber eyes darting between the holographic displays as the carnage unfolded. "Exalted One." Koltar's voice cut through the cacophony, his usual composure replaced by desperation. "We've lost 2 dreadnoughts and over 50 escorts. Their targeting is—" "Silence," Varlek bellowed, though his voice carried the weight of his own growing dread. "Reform the lines. Do not allow their formations to breach." But there was no time for reorganization. The human fleet moved with ruthless efficiency, exploiting every gap in the Draven defenses. Massive battleships at the vanguard released waves of concentrated firepower, while squadrons of smaller ships flanked and harassed the Draven vessels, overwhelming them with coordinated attacks. The Kralzan, the Empire's ultimate weapon, loomed at the rear of the Draven formation like a black monolith. Its conduits pulsed with latent energy, but it remained inert, its systems recharging after its failed strike against Earth. human forces targeted it relentlessly, recognizing its significance. "Commander!" Koltar shouted, panic seeping into his tone. "They're focusing fire on the Kralksan. Its shielding won't hold much longer." Varlik's gaze hardened. "Redirect escorts to defend the Merak. Do not let the Kralksan fall." Yet even as the order was issued, the Merak's defenses faltered. A barrage of human missiles struck its shield generators, overloading the systems in a cascade of sparks and flame. The once imposing dreadnought was exposed, its sleek black hull vulnerable to the full fury of the human fleet. Through the observation deck's viewport, Varlik watched as a squadron of human bombers darted past the overwhelmed Draven defenders. They flew with uncanny precision, weaving through plasma fire and debris to deliver their payloads. Explosions rippled across the Merak's surface, rupturing its energy conduits. A final, cataclysmic detonation consumed the ship, sending a shockwave that rattled even the Zorviven. Varlik's eyes remained fixed on the expanding debris cloud, his mind numb. The Kralksan, the weapon of the Empire, the pinnacle of their might, was gone. Its loss was not just a failure, it was a collapse of everything he had believed incontestable. His hands dropped to his sides, the tension in his body draining as if he had been struck physically. For the first time he stood motionless, unable to issue a command, his mind refusing to accept the reality before him. The command deck fell silent, officers frozen at their stations, their eyes glued to the holographic displays. No one shouted orders, no one scrambled to respond. The reality of their defeat hung heavy in the air, pressing on every soul like the vacuum of space itself. Strategist Koltar's claws hovered over his console, motionless, as if moving them would somehow break the fragile stillness. It was as though time itself had stopped in collective acknowledgement of their impending doom. "Exalted One," Koltar said, his voice trembling. "The Kralksan is gone." Varlik said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on the devastation, his mind a whirlwind of rage and despair. Around him, the command deck was a cacophony of alarms and frantic voices as officers struggled to salvage what remained of the fleet. The Draven ships that survived the initial onslaught were scattered and disorganized, their formations breaking apart under the relentless human advance. Battleships crumbled beneath concentrated fire, their fragments colliding with smaller vessels in chaotic spirals. Even the Zorviven was not spared, its shields flickering under the strain of repeated impacts. "Exalted One, our forces," Koltar began, but Varlik cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I see it," Varlik growled. "Focus all remaining firepower on their central formations. If we are to fall, we will take as many of them with us as we can." The order was carried out with grim determination. The Draven fleet unleashed its weapons in a final desperate counterattack, targeting the human battleships at the forefront. Plasma beams lanced through the void, striking several ships and engulfing them in fireballs. But for every human vessel destroyed, 3 more advanced to take its place. One by one, the remaining Draven ships were picked off, their shields overwhelmed and their hulls reduced to smoldering wreckage. The once proud fleet of the Empire was reduced to a scattering of battered survivors, limping through the void as the human encirclement tightened around them. On the command deck of the Zorviven, the atmosphere was suffocating. Officers moved mechanically, their faces pale with shock. Koltar's claws trembled as he relayed orders that he knew would make little difference. Varlik stood at the center, his imposing figure now a shadow of its former dominance. The weight of the Empire's failure bore down on him, but he refused to show weakness. "Exalted One," Koltar said quietly, his voice barely audible over the din. "We cannot sustain this." Before Varlik could respond, the comms crackled to life. A single transmission cut through the chaos, the voice of Admiral John Opare resonating with calm authority. "Commander Varlik," Opare began, his tone measured but firm, "your choices have led to the destruction of almost all your fleet. How many more lives will you sacrifice, Commander? Withdraw now, or you will be annihilated." The words hung in the air like a blade, slicing through the tension on the command deck. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the distant echoes of explosions and the hum of failing systems. Varlik's amber eyes narrowed, his mind racing. He refused to respond, refusing to give the humans the satisfaction. But in his silence, the truth was undeniable. The Draven fleet was broken, its strength shattered by a foe they had dismissed as myths. The transmission ended, and the Zorv even trembled as another wave of human firepower struck its shields. Varlik straightened, his expression unreadable as he prepared to issue his next command. The Draven fleet hovered in disarray, its once imposing formation reduced to chaos. At the center of it all, the Zorv even remained bruised but intact. High Commander Ighan Varlik stood motionless at the command deck's projection table, the tactical display presenting an undeniable truth. The humans held all the power. Their silent fleet, an impenetrable barrier on every front, encircled the Draven survivors with cold precision. "Exalted One," Koltar said carefully, his voice tight with unease. "The humans are waiting for our response. They have given us an ultimatum." Varlik's hands rested on the edge of the console, his knuckles white against the dark surface. The echo of Admiral Opere's words still rang in his mind. The humans had made no threat. They had stated facts, delivered with an unshakable calm that cut deeper than any barrage of fire. "How many ships remain operational?" Varlik asked, his voice low but steady. "Exalted One," Koltar said carefully, his voice tight with unease. "Less than 30% of our fleet remains operational. Most are escort ships with minimal firepower. The dreadnoughts..." He hesitated, leaving the implication unspoken. Varlik exhaled slowly through his nose, his amber eyes narrowing. "What would you have me do, strategist? Beg for mercy?" Koltar's claws twitched against the console. "I would have us live, Exalted One." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Varlik straightened, his gaze flicking back to the tactical display. The Draven Empire's once indomitable fleet was gone, and the cold void of space was now the stage for their most humiliating defeat. "Open the channel," Varlik commanded, his voice sharp. "Let them hear us." Varlik inhaled sharply through his nose, straightening his posture. He forced his hands to clasp behind his back, though his claws threatened to bite into his palms. "Admiral Opere," he began, his tone deliberate. "We acknowledge your terms. We will withdraw." There was a pause, and in that silence, Varlik felt the weight of his admission settle over the bridge. He clenched his jaw before continuing, each word grinding against his pride. "On behalf of the Draven Empire, I extend our regret for this incursion." Opere's response was immediate. "Leave, now." "And Commander," he continued with his voice sharpened with an edge of finality, "tell the High Leader Tarakshal that if any of you dare to trouble us again, we won't just defend our world, we'll come for the Empire." The transmission ended, cutting off any further exchange. The humans offered no pomp, no posturing, only the simple, undeniable expectation of compliance. Varlik turned to his officers, his claws pressing so tightly into his palms that faint rivulets of green blood trailed down his fingers. "Signal the fleet," he ordered, his voice tight with restraint. "We retreat." The Draven survivors moved sluggishly, engines sputtering as they aligned their trajectories. Ships turned in unison, their bows facing away from Earth and its formidable defenders. The humans did not move to follow. They simply watched, their presence a silent reminder of their dominance. On the observation deck, Varlik stood alone, his gaze fixed on the distant glow of Earth. The world that had defied the might of the Draven Empire shrank slowly as the fleet retreated. Behind him, Koltar approached cautiously, his usual confidence tempered by the weight of their defeat. "Exalted One," Koltar began quietly, "they will speak of this day across the stars." Varlik turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Let them speak. Let them embellish their tales. We underestimated them, Koltar. We allowed myths to blind us to their reality." He turned back to the viewport, his voice growing colder. "But we will not forget." The silence stretched as the Zorviven led the battered fleet into the outer reaches of the system. Varlik's thoughts churned, a maelstrom of anger, shame, and begrudging respect. The humans had been a shadow, a story whispered among the conquerors of the galaxy. But they had risen, their ingenuity and defiance proving more formidable than even the Driven had imagined. Koltar remained silent, knowing better than to interrupt. Varlek's amber eyes burned as he stared into the void, the memories of their obliterated fleet etched into his mind. As the fleet disappeared into the vastness of space, Varlek allowed himself one final glance at the system behind them. Earth, its defenses impenetrable, its people relentless, was now a beacon of defiance, a world that had turned back the might of an empire. For the first time in his life, Varlek felt the grip of fear, not for his life, but for the Draven Empire, for his people. And as the Zorviven faded into the depths, he whispered the truth that now burned within him. They were not myths. They are doom. Hey there again. I'm glad you've come so far. Hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button. This is really important to the channel. Really important. And I have one more thing for you. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.